The curtain was about to rise, but Dean Martin stood backstage hollowed out by grief, minutes after burying his mother. Walking on stage wasn't bravery, it was a risk. One wrong moment, one crack in his voice, and the illusion would collapse. The band waited. The crowd laughed. And then he did something no one expected. Where are you watching from today? In the 1950s, the rules of show business were unforgiving. Audiences paid to escape their problems, not to inherit someone else's grief. And entertainers were expected to deliver perfection no matter the cost. Dean Martin knew this better than most. By then, he was already a national figure, a man whose smile promised ease, whose voice carried warmth, whose presence told America everything would be fine for a while. But the night of his first show after burying his mother shattered that contract. There was no room for mourning in a Las Vegas showroom packed with expectation. Promoters didn't cancel for funerals. Bands didn't pause for heartbreak. You showed up, or you were replaced. That was the quiet law everyone followed. Dean had buried his mother only hours earlier, the woman who believed in him before the lights, before the suits, before the applause. Now he stood in a narrow backstage corridor that smelled of cigarettes and brass polish, staring at a door that separated private pain from public obligation. Stepping through meant pretending he was whole. Staying behind meant admitting weakness in a world that punished it. This moment mattered because it tested something deeper than professionalism. It tested whether dignity could survive inside a system built on masks. Every man in the orchestra pit sensed it. Every performer watching from the wings knew this night could change how power moved on stage forever. Dean Martin came from a world where men didn't speak openly about pain. He was raised in a working-class Italian-American family where survival mattered more than sensitivity, and where emotions were carried quietly, like tools you didn't show unless needed. His mother had been the steady center of that world, the voice that defended his dreams when singing seemed foolish, when boxing and factory work looked safer. Her faith built his confidence long before audiences ever did. Now, without her, the stage felt hostile instead of welcoming. The stakes weren't just professional, they were existential. If Dean broke down publicly, it would confirm every suspicion that entertainers were fragile, disposable, replaceable. The industry thrived on that imbalance. The crowd demanded vulnerability, but punished it when it appeared unscripted. That night, executives sat comfortably in the room, already counting receipts, confident the show would go on as planned. No one announced the funeral. No one warned the audience. The system assumed Dean would do what he always did: smile, croon, charm, and leave his real self behind the curtain. Yet something in him resisted. Grief sharpened his awareness. He noticed the jokes whispered about him backstage, the casual assumption that he'd power through. Power, he realized, belonged to those who pretended they didn't feel. This night would ask whether he accepted that rule, or quietly challenged it, without breaking the room apart. Silence backstage felt heavier than noise. Musicians tuned instruments, stagehands checked cables, but no one spoke directly to Dean about the obvious loss etched into his face. This avoidance was part of the system, too. Acknowledging grief risked slowing the machine. He adjusted his cufflinks mechanically, muscle memory guiding movements his mind could barely register. Outside, laughter rippled as drinks were poured, and the audience settled into their seats, unaware they were about to witness something unscripted. The danger wasn't failure. Dean had sung through exhaustion before. The danger was authenticity. If he allowed himself to be human, he could lose control of the room, or worse, invite pity. Pity was poison to a performer's authority. Yet pretending felt like betrayal, not just of his mother's memory, but of himself. This moment mattered because it sat at the intersection of power and vulnerability. The crowd held financial power. The promoters held contractual power. Dean held only his voice and the choice of how honestly to use it. That imbalance defined entertainment culture for decades. Most men swallowed their pain and cashed the check. Tonight, however, grief refused to stay hidden. It pressed against his chest, making each breath deliberate. The announcer's voice echoed, signaling minutes to curtain. Dean closed his eyes briefly, not to pray, but to decide who he would be when the lights hit him. Dean Martin's strength was never loud. Unlike performers who dominated rooms through intensity, his power came from restraint. He understood timing, understood silence, understood that understatement could command attention more effectively than force. That understanding was shaped by years of watching his mother endure hardship without complaint. She worked, worried, encouraged, and endured, all without asking the world to notice. That quiet resilience lived in him. As he stood backstage, memory surfaced uninvited, her correcting his posture as a boy, her listening to him practice songs late at night, her belief that his voice could carry him somewhere better. Those memories didn't weaken him, they anchored him. Dean realized that the persona America loved was built on something real, something she helped create. The charm, the ease, the warmth, they weren't tricks. They were inherited values, shaped into performance. Grief, then, wasn't an enemy. It was proof of connection. That insight shifted his mindset. Instead of fearing collapse, he began to see honesty as a form of control. If he chose the moment, chose the words, he could guide the room through discomfort rather than be swallowed by it. Inner strength, he understood, wasn't about suppressing emotion, but about directing it. The question was whether the audience would follow him or turn away. Long before fame, Dean learned how to read rooms. He boxed professionally for a time, and the ring taught him awareness, the ability to sense danger, to wait for openings, to conserve energy. Later, in smoky clubs, he learned that crowds responded not just to sound, but to confidence. Lose that, and noise turned hostile. Those lessons shaped his instincts now. He could feel the tension before stepping on stage, the fragile balance between expectation and reality. His mother's death sharpened that instinct further. He knew the crowd wanted the familiar Dean Martin, the carefree singer, the smooth talker. But he also knew that pretending tonight could hollow him out permanently. There was a dignity line he could not cross without losing something essential. That internal boundary mattered more than applause. His mindset shifted from survival to intention. He wouldn't overshare. He wouldn't dramatize his pain. He would simply acknowledge it, on his terms. That decision restored his sense of agency. Power, he realized, didn't require dominance. It required clarity. He straightened his jacket, took a measured breath, and prepared to walk into the light, not as a character, but as a man who had lost someone irreplaceable and refused to hide it. The bandleader glanced toward him with concern, silently asking if he was ready. Dean nodded once, slowly. Inside, he rehearsed nothing. No jokes, no lines. He trusted his instincts more than preparation. That trust came from years of navigating pressure without showing strain. Yet this pressure felt different, personal, raw, unmanageable by routine. Still, he recognized something familiar in it. The moment before a decisive choice. Many performers would lean harder into humor, masking pain with louder laughter. Dean chose the opposite. He decided to reduce, not amplify. Fewer words, less movement, more truth. His inner strength came from refusing to perform grief theatrically. He didn't want sympathy. He wanted honesty to stand quietly in the room. That restraint would require courage, because silence invites interpretation. People might misread it. They might grow uncomfortable. But discomfort, he sensed, could be transformative if handled carefully. He touched the door handle and felt the vibration of applause swell. That sound usually energized him. Tonight, it felt distant. He stepped forward anyway, carrying not just his own grief, but the legacy of a woman who taught him to stand straight even when the ground shifted. Whatever happened next would echo beyond the room, whether anyone realized it yet or not. The first warning came in the form of subtle pressure. A stage manager leaned in and reminded him of timing, of cues, of keeping things light tonight. The implication was clear. Don't change the tone. Don't disrupt the formula. Dean acknowledged it without comment. He understood the fear behind the reminder. Deviations risk complaints. Complaints risked lost bookings. The system protected itself reflexively. The second warning came from a fellow performer, a quiet aside suggesting he skip any mention of personal matters. They're here to forget, the man whispered. Dean nodded again, outwardly agreeable. Internally, the decision had already been made. The fear wasn't just professional, it was contagious. Everyone around him sensed the fragility of the moment. If Dean faltered, it could make the room uneasy, unpredictable. That fear pressed in, encouraging conformity. He felt it, the temptation to comply, to deliver the expected product and retreat. But conformity felt like erasure. Each warning clarified the stakes. Obedience would preserve his position. Honesty might redefine it. As the announcer called his name, the final warning came unspoken. The knowledge that thousands of eyes would soon evaluate not just his performance, but his composure. Fear moved through the room, like static. Dean stepped into it deliberately. Applause greeted him warmly, almost automatically. The crowd saw the smile, the tuxedo, the familiar silhouette. They didn't see the funeral dirt still clinging to his shoes. That invisibility was part of the danger. If he revealed too much, the audience might recoil. If he revealed nothing, the weight might crush him mid-song. He walked to center stage, accepting the applause with a small nod. The band waited for the downbeat, but Dean raised a hand, signaling a pause. That pause was the first crack in expectation. Murmurs rippled through the room. People leaned forward slightly, curious, alert. Pauses on stage are risky. Silence can feel like failure. Dean held it anyway. Pressure mounted. The orchestra watched him carefully. Executives stiffened. This wasn't rehearsed. Fear from others intensified, not because something bad had happened, but because something uncontrolled was unfolding. Dean felt the room tighten, and he understood that this was the threshold. Once he spoke, there would be no retreat. The silence stretched just long enough to demand attention, without turning hostile. That was his instinct at work, controlling time instead of racing it. The third escalation came internally. Dean felt his throat tighten, emotion pressing upward unexpectedly. This was the real test, not the crowd, not the executives, but his own body's response. He could feel tears threatening, breath shortening. If he lost control now, it wouldn't be dignified. It would be messy, public, and potentially humiliating. He grounded himself by focusing on something simple, his mother's voice telling him to stand tall. That memory steadied him. The room waited. You could hear glasses clink faintly, a cough from the back. Everyone sensed something significant was coming. Fear shifted into anticipation. Dean knew anticipation could be shaped. He leaned slightly toward the microphone. Not dramatically, just enough. The band remained frozen. This moment balanced on a knife edge between breakdown and mastery. The escalation was complete. Warnings ignored, pressure absorbed, fear acknowledged. Now came the decision that would define the night. Under the stage lights, Dean's face looked calmer than he felt. The audience saw composure. They didn't see the internal effort holding it together. He took a measured breath and scanned the room briefly, making eye contact with no one and everyone at once. This was not part of the act they expected. His voice, when it came, was quieter than usual. The shift was immediate. People leaned in. He didn't smile. He didn't joke. The emotional trigger was subtle, the absence of his usual armor. He let that absence speak before words did. The risk crystallized in that quiet. By breaking pattern, he invited genuine attention rather than passive consumption. The band leader watched closely, ready to adjust. Dean's heart beat steadily now, his decision fully formed. He understood that if he spoke truth plainly, without performance, the room might follow, or it might fracture. He accepted either outcome. That acceptance was visible, and it changed the atmosphere. Silence became respectful rather than awkward. This was the opening he needed. Dean rested one hand lightly on the microphone stand, grounding himself physically. He didn't announce a tragedy. He didn't seek sympathy. He simply allowed reality into the room. The emotional trigger deepened, not through spectacle, but through restraint. The audience sensed sincerity instinctively. They had seen performers overshare before, turning pain into content. This was different. Dean's posture was straight, his voice steady, his eyes clear. He spoke as if addressing individuals rather than a mass. That choice personalized the moment, making each listener feel included rather than imposed upon. The risk remained high. A single misstep could tip the mood into discomfort, but Dean's calm authority guided the room. This was not confession, it was acknowledgement. The threat wasn't external, no heckler, no visible antagonist, but internalized pressure from an industry that discouraged authenticity. By pausing the show, he confronted that pressure publicly without naming it. The room held its breath. Then he said the 5 words. Not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. They landed heavier than any joke or note could have. In that instant, the emotional trigger released. The audience understood without explanation. You could feel it ripple outward, a collective recognition of shared human loss. No one laughed. No one clapped. They simply listened. The visible thread dissolved, replaced by something rarer, mutual respect. Dean didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The power of the moment came from what he chose not to say. By limiting himself to those words, he controlled the narrative completely. The band waited, understanding instinctively that music would come later. The room shifted from entertainment space to communal space. That transformation was the genius reaction, not confrontation through defiance, but through dignity. Dean had flipped the power dynamic by refusing to perform grief while still honoring it. The audience followed his lead because he trusted them to. Silence stretched again, but this time it was warm. The public confrontation wasn't with a person, but with expectation itself. By speaking those 5 words, Dean challenged the unspoken rule that entertainers must be untouched by real life. The confrontation was gentle but unmistakable. He didn't ask permission. He didn't apologize. He simply stated truth. That act reframed the relationship between performer and audience. He was no longer an object delivering distraction. He was a man sharing a moment. The crowd's response confirmed the shift. Faces softened. Shoulders relaxed. Some people wiped their eyes quietly, surprised by their own reaction. The genius of the moment lay in its simplicity. No speech. No moralizing. Just presence. Dean held that presence without flinching. He allowed the audience to process at their own pace. That restraint prevented sentimentality from overwhelming authenticity. In confronting expectation, he reclaimed control of the room without raising his voice. Power changed hands subtly but decisively. As seconds passed, something remarkable happened. The audience gave him space, a rare gift in a performance setting. They didn't interrupt with applause or murmurs. They trusted him to continue when ready. That trust was earned instantly. Dean acknowledged it with a small nod, barely perceptible. The band followed his cue as he finally signaled readiness. Music would resume, but on new terms. The confrontation had flipped the hierarchy. Instead of demanding entertainment, the crowd now offered attention. This reversal was the payoff of his genius reaction. By honoring his own boundary, he invited others to honor it too. The room felt lighter, not heavier, because honesty relieved tension rather than created it. Dean's dignity set the tone. He didn't need to explain why the words mattered. Everyone understood. The show could proceed because something real had been acknowledged. That acknowledgement made everything that followed feel earned. Dean transitioned seamlessly back into performance, but the quality had changed. His voice carried a new depth, not because he sang differently, but because listeners heard him differently. The confrontation had resolved without conflict, without embarrassment. That resolution demonstrated mastery, emotional intelligence wielded with precision. The industry's power imbalance had been exposed and neutralized in one quiet moment. Dean didn't dominate, he aligned. The crowd responded with focused attention, rather than noisy approval. This was respect, not fandom. By choosing restraint, he avoided turning grief into spectacle. Instead, he transformed it into connection. That transformation was irreversible. Anyone present would remember it not as a breakdown, but as a demonstration of control under pressure. The genius reaction lay in trusting simplicity over performance. In that trust, Dean preserved his dignity and elevated the room with him. The immediate reaction from those in authority was cautious relief. Executives exchanged glances, recognizing that the feared disruption had become something valuable. There were no complaints, no walkouts, no awkward laughter. Instead, there was cohesion. The band played with heightened sensitivity, responding to Dean's pacing instinctively. The tension that had gripped the room earlier dissolved into focused engagement. Fear broke quietly, without fanfare. The audience leaned forward, not because they were entertained, but because they were invited. That invitation changed everything. Dean felt the shift physically, shoulders easing, breath deepening. The moment had passed, and it had held. That success wasn't measured in applause, but in silence honored. As the set continued, The crowd's response grew warmer, more attentive. Applause came at appropriate moments, respectful rather than performative. Those who feared vulnerability now saw its strength. The authority figures who once discouraged deviation recognized its impact. Dean hadn't undermined the show. He had deepened it. The tension broke completely by the final song, replaced with a shared understanding that something meaningful had occurred. No one needed to name it. That unspoken recognition was enough. Dean exited the stage later to genuine appreciation, not just for his talent, but for his humanity. The risk had paid off. Backstage, the atmosphere was different. Conversations were quieter, more deliberate. A fellow performer approached Dean, offering a simple nod rather than words. It was enough. The stage manager thanked him for the show, tone sincere rather than procedural. No one mentioned the 5 words directly, but everyone referenced the moment indirectly. The room felt right. People were really listening. Dean accepted these comments calmly. In private, the adrenaline faded, and grief returned gently. He sat alone briefly, allowing himself a breath he hadn't taken all night. The truth he'd shared publicly made private mourning easier, not harder. Later, a quiet handshake with an executive sealed an unspoken agreement. Dean's integrity had proven valuable. There was no reprimand, no warning for deviation. Instead, there was respect. Someone admitted softly that they'd been afraid of silence, afraid of emotion, afraid of losing control. Dean listened without judgment. That admission mattered. It confirmed that his choice had shifted understanding, not just mood. Power structures don't change loudly. They adjust quietly when confronted with dignity. Dean left the venue knowing he hadn't compromised himself or his career. He had aligned them. In the days that followed, word spread, not as gossip, but as admiration. People repeated the story of the night Dean Martin honored his mother without spectacle. The 5 words became legend, not because of what they said, but because of how they were said. The lesson endured. True strength doesn't announce itself. It stands calmly, speaks honestly, and lets others rise to meet it. That night, Dean Martin proved that dignity, once shown, teaches everyone in the room how to listen. Some moments redefine power without raising a voice. If this story moved you, like the video, subscribe for more untold moments of quiet courage, and comment below. When has honesty changed the room for you?